This is Dan, N9LVS. I'm here today on Skype with Bill, W9MXQ, and he's got a lot of old vintage radio equipment he wants to show us. Bill, how's it going today?
Pretty good, Dan. Thanks a lot for the call. Kind of interesting stuff here to show you today.
Okay, excellent. Let's get right into it here. Okay, what do we got here?
Okay, this is a 3 Series Collins S-Line 32S3 75S3B receiver and the accessories and the 30L1 linear amplifier and that kind of like Heathkit keyer down there in the corner, kind of a contrast in colors. This is something I made up for a future QSL card. That's the same radios laid out slightly different. There's that character standing there in the back. This is an idea from an old Hammerland Radio Company advertisement years ago, where the owner of Hammerland stood behind his radios. And there's the mating transceiver from the S-Line series, the KWM2A and the 312B5 console, which is kind of hard to find. And there's that same 30L1 linear amplifier and the same Heathkit keyer again. This is the Collins Gold Dust Twins, minus the speaker. I've never been able to find one that I thought was in good shape. That's the 75A4 receiver and the KWS1 transmitter. You can see the transmitter's power supply over to the left, and there's an Ameritron tuner there and a D104 microphone. And that radio I do get on CW also with an old-fashioned bug. There you see the Drake twins. This is the C line, a T4XC retransmitter, R4C receiver. You can see the MN2000 tuner over to the left, a Shure 44 microphone, and the Drake L4B linear amplifier that matched that set. There's also an MFJ keyer there. I'm not sure if that same keyer, I think the model's around, but this one has the bencher key with it. And there from the same time period is the Drake TR4C transceiver. The TR4 and its various iterations went on for many, many years. And you see it there hooked up with the RV4C external VFO. Also that same MN2000, the Shure microphone, and the L4B that you saw previously, along with that MFJ keyer. Okay, here we have just kind of an oddity. I'm not much of a shortwave listener, but I kind of enjoy it. This is an SPR4, all solid state receiver, kind of built almost like a solid state R4C for general coverage, but there's not too many of these around. They're just kind of interesting, and there's the MS4 speaker next to it. Okay, this is kind of my pride and joy station from the Drake line. This is a very nice TR7, and you can see the external VFO, the RV7 next to it. SP75 speech processor up on top of the VFO. On top of the radio is the speaker, the MS7, the watt meter, WH7. Over to the left is a MN2700 antenna tuner, and over to the right is the L7 linear amplifier. Just a really nice old station. On top of the tuner there, you might notice a phone patch, which of course we hardly ever use anymore, but I have it with that set, and a Drake 7027 microphone there. Okay, there is actually Hallicrafter's second transceiver for sideband. They did make one called the FPM 200, which back in the 50s was extremely way ahead of its time. Very few of those were made, so I always refer to this as the first. This is the SR 150 transceiver. It's got its matching power supply there and an HA1 keyer, and there's a bencher bug. Now, I realize to you purists out there, you're going to say, nobody had even thought of the bencher keyer there back in those days, but I like it and I use it, so it's with my station. This is one of my earliest collectible items. I'm only the second owner of this station. This is the Hallicrafter's SX117 receiver, HT44 transmitter, matching power supply for the transmitter and also speaker for the receiver. Up on top of the power supply, you see the splatter guard, HA8. That was actually a poor man's modulation monitor. And you see right in the center is a rectangle, and that's a tuning eye tube. And it actually closes with modulation. And when it touches, you're at full modulation. There's a low frequency tuner up on top of the receiver. Over to the left is the HT45 linear amplifier. It has a power supply sitting on the floor that's as big as the transmitter and linear together, huge power supply. Over to the right is the HA1 keyer, which you saw before, and there's that bencher key again. I use an Electro Voice microphone, as you can see in front of the linear amplifier. Okay, here we have Hallicrafter's entry for the real DXers. This is the Cyclone 2, SR400. There was a Cyclone SR400. There was a Cyclone 2 SR400. And you'll see the even later one in the next picture. But that's the external VFO matched with it there. And what's interesting here is that VFO, the external VFO, would allow you to receive on 2 frequencies at once. So those of us that work DX know that we sure like to listen to the calling and the listening frequency at the same time. I believe, but somebody may prove me wrong, that this was the first time the commercial guys ever made this happen. So this was really ahead of its time back in the day. There's that HA1 keyer again and the bencher key and another D104 microphone. Just for insert, I also happen to have a Cyclone 3. That was the SR400A, and I just show it for reference there. It was different, however. The 1 and the 2 were 400-watt radios input. The Cyclone 3 was a 550-watt input. And for you collectors of Hallacrafters, you'll notice that by that time, Hallacrafters had changed their emblem from the H with a red background to the H with a blue background. There's just a little bit of trivia for you. Arguably, this is Hallacrafters' last radio. There's some people that argue about that. This is the FPM 300. It went through several iterations. This is a Mark II model that cleared up a lot of its early problems. This radio was called the Safari. Hallacrafters pretty much named its transceivers. And this one was called the Safari, although you don't see that on the front panel anywhere. 260 watts PEP. Nice little radio when they work, and this one is working just great. And there you see the blue background H next to the meter. This is the very last transceiver, in my opinion, they ever made. Okay, I just wanted to show you this picture. There's a couple of D104 microphones with their respective radios. So there's what I call the first really high volume transceiver on the left, the SR150, and the very last, the FPM 300. What I kind of notice here, being a manufacturing guy, is over all those years, Hallacrafters never slipped away from their color match. They match each other almost perfectly. Okay, just wanted to throw this in here. One of my favorite radios, the good old Hallacrafters SX100, those classic dual half-moon dials. There's just nothing quite like them. All right, this is Collins's biggest competition with the S-line. This is the Heathkit SB101. The SB100 was the original one, but this one is one model later. 80 through 10 meter transceiver, wonderful radio, works very, very well, and is a worthy competitor to the KWM2. You can see the SB600 speaker to the left. It's got the power supply for the transceiver built inside. Over to the right is the SB200 linear amplifier. I tell you what, you see those amplifiers everywhere. They live great right up to this day. And there's a Heathkit keyer there. Now it matches the radios, and a Heathkit microphone rebranded from Electro Voice. And while Heathkit did have the transceiver, which was very successful, they also made separates, competing with the Collins S-line. This one's a little bit later version because that slightly narrower receiver you see almost in the middle, that's an SB303. The first one was the 300. So this one is all solid state, really a step ahead of the boys out there at that time. On the left is the SB401 transmitter. The transmitter is self-powered. It has supply inside. So in this case, the speaker sitting there is only a speaker. There's no power supply in it. And there I made it up with that same microphone, the same SB200 linear, and that same Heathkit keyer. Okay, now you're moving over to one of my pride and joy stations. This is a complete national station from around 1969. I duplicated an ad that was in CQ magazine back then. I believe the title of the ad was something like Live a Little, and they showed this entire set. There's the power supply for the transceiver at the left. There's the NCX5, the VX501 external VFO, the NCL2000 linear, and the HRO 500. It's kind of interesting. The HRO 500, there was no information about how to integrate that into this station. Back then, hams just, as I would say, they just did it. The transceiver and external VFO are unique. They have digital readout, which was done by, I believe, Vita Root, but a brand. But anyway, it's a mechanical digital readout. National went to great pains to make that linear with the VFO. They had a series of ads in QST and CQ back in those days showing how they did that. National also, slightly later, introduced a lower cost transceiver. This is the NCX200, also referred to as the National 200, as you see on the label there. but they were referred to both in all of their literature. There you see that same power supply that I had with the NCX5. And to the right is another brand of equipment. That's an ICO keyer from back in the day, an ICO 717, which I built that from a kit. That's one of my older pieces of equipment in the shack, being driven by a Bencher keyer. Here's something I've had for a long time. I got this from the original owner back in the 60s. This is a National SW3, and along with what is even rarer, that cherry wood box that held the plug-in coils. This was called the Thrill Box, although National used that name with several radios back in the day. This is a super regenerative radio. I can tell you, it's a real treat to listen to this radio. It's a completely different sound to those of us today that are used to processed audio. And this is another example from National back in the day. This is a pre-war HROM, and by pre-war I mean World War II. Models such as this were at Bletchley Park in the United Kingdom when they were breaking the Enigma code that the Germans had. If you watch old movies or old news flicks about Bletchley Park, you will see banks of these receivers there. This one works perfectly, and there you see the drawer there at the bottom to pull out to change bands. There, just show you in a separate picture, that's the power supply for the HRO, along with an example of one of the plug-in drawers, and then a couple of extra coils in a box that was supplied by National. Interesting to note, you had to be careful when you pulled those trays out, because if you didn't shut off the B plus on the receiver, those little handles were hot. So that's a long time before OSHA. Here's one of my early transceivers that I had, although this isn't the one. I found this one not too many years ago. This is a Swan 350C, 550 watt transceiver. I had one of these back in the 70s. Nice radio, kind of an economical version of what's in the next picture. By the way, that's a old Turner microphone. Many of you that have been around a while remember them. They were quite popular. Okay, that's a fancier Swan station. Much of the circuitry identical to the previous picture item. That's a Swan 500CX. Again, 550 watts PEP, but had such niceties as selectable sideband and a CW monitor. There's a different Turner microphone. Also to the right is what I find to be a rare as hen's teeth, 508 external VFO. It's hard to find these. But I've been lucky. I also have one that matches the 350C that you just saw. But these are hard to find. Toward the end of Swan's reign, they changed their their marketing name to Cubic, C-U-B-I-C. Cubic had owned Swan for many years. So anyway, the last transceiver they marketed was the Cubic 103. This was a 160 through 10 transceiver with the work bands. As you see, it had digital readout, but notice something unique. It has two VFO knobs because it did have dual VFOs in the same radio box. That was kind of nice. That's shown with the matching power supply to the left. You've got the matching antenna tuner sitting on top of the power supply. And occasionally I use that with my 30L1. Now, I will tell you real quickly, these are actual setups. I rotate my equipment once a month, and I use my vintage stations. They all operate. I've been licensed since 1964, originally as W9MXQ. And that's when I got that Halla Crafter set and actually used it as my main station for quite some time. I refer to W9MXQ as the home for wayward ham gear. And that's it.
Well, thank you very much for getting on Skype with us. And maybe we'll see you down the band somewhere.
Sounds great, Dan. Thanks a lot. And I was happy to meet you at Superfest.
Okay, 7-3.
7-3.